NATO in the summit they just had. I mean, it's as if over Madrid, this fantasy sphere descended with the arrival of the leaders of 30 NATO members and the EU and Japan and South Korea. They all descend on Madrid, and they get hit with, Glinda the Good Witch came down and sprinkled them with fairy dust. And they were suddenly overcome with, exuberance. For instance, the notion of going from 40,000 readiness forces, rapid deployment forces to 300,000. Well, it sounds great on paper. I mean, and they produced a lot of great PowerPoints in Madrid. I mean, really impressive stuff. There's some it's big arrows, big words, big pictures. They ain't never going to get 300,000 people. I'll just put that right down right now. Can't afford it. They don't have the ability to sustain it. They have no clue what they're talking about. This is 30 idiots getting around thinking big on Stoltenberg, projecting something that will never happen. It will never happen. That's a guaranteed. Because what is a rapid reaction force? The idea means it reacts rapidly. That means that they need to be ready to fight now. There's a reason why they only had 40,000 of those. And remember, that includes Air Force, Navy, and ground troops. That's not 40,000 hardened forces. That's 40,000 nothing forces. First of all, the 40,000 were a joke. Airborne against tanks. It don't work. I mean, we learned that in Arnhem. We can go on and on and on. Now they're talking 300,000. That means you not only have to have the people to do it, the equipment to do it, but the same sustainability to do it. Pro hint, NATO. Russia's firing 60,000 rounds a day. You don't have enough ammunition in your armories to last 10 days in sustained combat with the Russians. You will run out of artillery and you will all die. Or they're just the 300,000 idiots who think you're going to turn into a rapid reaction force. I'm sorry to get worked up here, but the world is taking what these people say seriously. The British are cutting their forces from 84,000 to 72,000 because they can't afford it. And they're now going to what? Where are they going to get the 300,000? The Americans put the 5th Corps headquarters in Poland. Wow. Buy me a beer. I'm really nervous. There's one brigade of heavy brigade that rotates through Europe. There's a striker brigade that is good for screening. That's about it. They have other equipment for one more brigade to come in. That gives you a division if that brigade can land, because they're going to blow the warehouse up with all the stuff in it, blow up the ports, blow up the airports. You still don't have a division. A corps is 2 or more divisions. Where are they coming from? They don't exist. They're in America. They're underfunded. They don't. It's all pie in the sky. I'll give you another pie in the sky. The wonderful little love fest between Stoltenberg and, I'm sorry, I get my dog upset, Stoltenberg and Erdogan, and the Finns and the Swedes, and oh my God, we love each other. Let's sign the document. Ain't it nice? Except the Turks have said, I want 76 heads on a platter delivered before we agree to this. And the Swedes are going, what? Yes, 76 heads on a platter. That means you give me those 76 people I've given you by name. They're coming to Turkey. We're going to torture them. We're going to murder them because they're terrorists. And the Swedes are going, but some of them are Swedish citizens. Our laws won't allow it. They won't allow it. You know who else won't allow it? The European Union won't allow it because they have laws against this kind of thing. It will never happen. Finland just said, we ain't going to do it. And Erdogan said, then my parliament will never let you join NATO. So that little love fest they had, that made-for-TV magic moment, a Hallmark movie, it isn't happening. They aren't joining. They can't, because NATO is a dysfunctional, useless, pathetic nothing. China, we're going to take on China. Hell, you can't even take on yourself. You're scared of your own shadow. What's happening right now? It's some very serious stuff. Lithuania, a NATO member, has instituted a blockade against Kaliningrad, Russia. Kaliningrad isn't some sort of toy. I get this feeling that the Baltics and the Poles and everybody's like, Kaliningrad's just a little toy. We play with Kaliningrad because it's not really Russia. Oh, pro hint, it's really Russia. And if you blockade it, you're going to war against Russia, and Russia's going to blow you off the face of the earth. Because this isn't Ukraine. This isn't a special military operation. This is Russia. You're blockading Russia? Are you high? And now Europe's woken up saying, whoa, Lithuania, you may not want to do this. But the Lithuanians are like a little pathetic Pomeranian who thinks they can fight a Rottweiler. You're going to get taught a lesson, Lithuania, unless you reverse course. It's a serious lesson. And NATO's also waking up to the fact that they ain't got nothing to fight Russia. I already said, 10 days, all their artillery is gone, ammunition. And then the Russians just roll over you, because if you don't have artillery, you got nothing, you're going to die. Now we get to what's going on in the battlefield. There will be no ceasefire. Russia's winning this war. There's no reason for Russia to have a ceasefire. There will be no lengthy ceasefire line because Ukraine will cease to exist. That's the decision Ukraine has made. Ukraine has decided they're going to accept the weapons. As a result, Ukraine has basically signed its death warrant. Russia is going to continue this fight. Are they going to take Odessa? Let me ask this question. When you have a Russian president, Vladimir Putin, who says, I am the president of all Russians, my job is to defend all Russians. And you have a city of Odessa, which is a Russian city where the Ukrainians have come in and burned them to death. You're really going to leave Odessa in the hands of a Nazi regime? No. Odessa is Russia, will become Russia, will stay Russia in perpetuity. 500,000 pro-Russian people living in Transnistria. You're really going to leave that hanging there surrounded by embittered Ukrainians, idiotic Moldovans, Poles, Romanians? No, you're going to link it up with a land bridge and dare them to come on, because now it's going to be part of Russia. Like Kaliningrad, you mess with Transnistria, you're messing with Mother Russia, they will kill you. This is the reality. Russia's done playing games. It's over. It will take some time because Russia is not going to, have people die needlessly. We see this with Snake Island. Why keep air defense units on Snake Island that they get killed 5, 10, 15 soldiers at a time when the island means nothing? Pull back. You know what Russia can do at any time it wants to? Take Snake Island. So why do you have to stay there now when it means nothing? Throw them a bone, say, ship your grain, do whatever you want. And when we take Odessa, we'll take Snake Island, then we'll take Odessa, and it'll be all over. This is NATO. Literally, I've never seen such stupidity in my entire life. And what's not being talked about is what happened before NATO. The doppelganger, the economic doppelganger of NATO called G7. G7 just got their butts handed to them. They may not know it, but they do know it, because the Brits came together and said, yeah, we're tired of your little pathetic countries serving as the facilitators of American hegemony. We decided we don't want the dollar as the reserve currency. We're going to create our own reserve currency basket. We're linking up with the Russian SWIFT system to bypass that. You guys are pathetic. You're losers. And this thing called the rules-based international order, stick it in your ear. We're done with it. This is about the law-based international order. You know what else NATO did? They signed up to the rules-based international order formally. That means they declared war on the United Nations. They may not realize it. The United Nations may not realize it. But when you sign up for the rules-based international order, you're saying international law no longer matters. The only thing that matters is the unilateral dictate of the United States implemented by little minions called the G7 and NATO. That's where we're at today. They have lost. It's over. It's all over but the shouting or the potential nuclear conflict, because now we have to get very serious. At the end of the day here, the only thing NATO has is nuclear weapons. And there's a lot of people talking about today about the Suwalki Gap. It's a 60-mile stretch between Belarus and Kaliningrad, where the Lithuanian and the Polish border comes together. They're saying the Russians are going to move through the Suwalki Gap and establish a land corridor and all that. The problem is that involves Belarus. That's complicated. You know what isn't complicated? The Russians marching north out of Kaliningrad through Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and establishing a land bridge connecting them with St. Petersburg and eliminating these pathetic 3 little Baltic troublemakers. That's not, that's really what's going to happen. What happens when that happens? The British have upped the number of troops they're going to commit suicide with in the Baltics to 16,000. They'll kill all 16,000 British troops. All those Germans that for whatever reason thought it was a good idea to put German troops in Lithuania, as if that was never a bad idea, they're all going to die. The French have some pathetic French troops up there. They're going to die. There's a couple Americans up there. They're going to die. Then what's NATO going to do? Implement Article 5. What's Article 5 say? An attack against one is an attack against all. No, it doesn't say that at all. It says an attack against one makes everybody think whether or not they want to support what's going on. We may support verbally, we may support economically, we may support militarily. We don't know. We have to consider it. And consider what? Lithuania committing mass suicide by implementing an economic blockade, which is an act of war against Russia at a time when Russia's already pissed off about Ukraine. Nobody's coming to Lithuania's assistance. Nobody. First of all, the British don't have anything. When you kill 16,000 British troops, when they have a military of 72,000, they got nothing left. Literally, nothing left. The Germans, the only reason why they have a reinforced battalion in Lithuania is that they had to cannibalize everything they had. Remember, the Germans said they're going to spend $100 billion to get their military up to par. That means they're not up to par right now. It means that the Germans can't fight. Germans don't know how to fight. The Germans won't fight. Germans will die. That's what Germans do very well, especially when they're up against Russians who love killing Germans. So no, this is not a good place for NATO to be right now. It's a very bad place. Unfortunately, NATO doesn't realize it because they were underneath the little sphere of feel-good fairy dust, and they're saying words. But reality is going to hit. And the biggest reality that's going to hit is that everything NATO's talked about costs money. Monies are generated by viable economies. And there ain't no such thing as a viable economy in Europe anymore. It's going to get much worse because Russia's getting ready to hit the off switch across the board. And as they hit the off switch, Europe, the lights go out. You know, there's that photograph that we like to show in the United States of North Korea at night. You know, because you got South Korea on all the lights in South Korea, the lights in China, the lights in Japan. And there's this whole bunch of darkness in North Korea. See how pathetic they are. Hey, this winter, guys, let's take a photograph of Europe. Huh? There might be some lights. It'll be the dull, bright orange lights of Europeans using coal and wood to warm their hands because they ain't got nothing else. That's the reality of Europe right now. It's a pathetic continent populated by pathetic people who have sold their soul to the devil, the United States, for what? The promise of what? Suicide? Because that's what they're committing right now against Russia. And when we speak of neo-Nazi movement, that's a political movement. It's not a military movement. There's military formations that are comprised of people that are drawn from this odious ideology. They'll be taken care of as part of demilitarization, which is ongoing. It's very efficient, 10 to 1 or 10 or more casualty ratio, unsustainable by the Ukrainians. The military operation, by the way, is not over. It's not even close to being over. The Russians are achieving a culminating point. But understand this, NATO is going to continue to open up the floodgates. Weapons are going to continue to come in. They're going to be put in the hands of poorly trained Ukrainian soldiers who are going to go up against highly motivated, highly trained, well-equipped Russians who are going to kill them. And we're going to have to repeat this cycle for a long time, for many, many months. So the military operation's not over, not even close to being over. Russia's winning. They're going to win, but there's a lot of Ukrainians left to kill. And unfortunately, Zelensky appears to be more than happy to let these, we've talked, some people are talking about up to 50,000 dead Ukrainians so far. I would submit that it's probably a low number, that it's more. That means by the time we're done, we're talking a potential of 250,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers, because it's only going to get worse. When I talk about a culminating point, combat efficiency in a unit is a totality. And when a unit starts to suffer casualties and they get replaced with poorly trained troops, you've diluted that efficiency number. And we get into kill ratios, kill probabilities, all this other scientific nonsense that military people use. The bottom line is the Russians maintain a very high kill potential, and the Ukrainians have extremely reduced resistance to this kill potential, which means that the casualty rates are going to get higher and higher and higher and higher on a greater frequency. So I would say by the time this war is done, there will be over 250,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers, probably close to 750,000 wounded. That's 1 million Ukrainian casualties. Thank you, Zelensky. But now, and among those casualties will be all of the Nazi soldiers. Not a single one will survive. Russians know who they all are. They have the names. They have the videotapes. They have the addresses. They will all die. End of story. That's demilitarization. Denazification means you have to eradicate the political ideology. One, this has to be done legally. There has to be a constitutional change in Ukraine where a new constitution is promulgated that bans this ideology. Now, you need to understand that Stepan Bandera is a national hero to many Ukrainians. How do you stomp this out? Well, the first thing you do is you blow up every statue of Stepan Bandera. This is part of denazification. I would love to be part of this party that goes in and literally puts dynamite on every single pro-Nazi monument and blow it up. The other thing you do is you arrest every single member of the political party and you throw them in jail because they are Nazis. There will be no tears shed for you. Europe's already losing patience with you. German media just confronted the Ukrainian ambassador about why in God's name did he visit the grave of Stepan Bandera? Why would you do that? And the Ukrainian ambassador, because he's a hero. He's not a hero. He murdered hundreds of thousands of Jews, hundreds of thousands of Poles, hundreds of thousands of Russians. He's a pig, literally a human pig, and he should be reviled. No, I'm sorry. I just insulted every pig in the world. I apologize to the pig population. But the point is, denazification is an absolute. Now, I'm not dictating to the Russians. You asked me what it would entail. Anything less than what I just said, you did not denazify, because now you get into what Ray talked about. And this is the biggest threat to Russia, an incomplete victory, stopping too soon. If you dare stop and leave, if there's anything called a ceasefire line, Russia lost this war. Russia loses. If there's a ceasefire, Russia loses. If there's any retained Ukrainian nationalism, pockets of nationalism, whether it's in Western Ukraine, in Kiev, Lvov, wherever, Russia lost the war. I'm stating it straight up. Russia, the only way Russia wins this is absolute victory across the board. Anything less than this, then Russia should never have crossed the border to begin with. Should never have crossed the border to begin with, because Russia has kicked up a hornet's nest. They've got NATO doing stupid stuff. They got the G7 doing stupid stuff. And all this stupid stuff will fail if Russia keeps its foot on the accelerator. But the moment Russia takes its foot off the accelerator, slows down, tries to reason. How do you reason with a rabid dog? NATO is a rabid dog. Russia needs to become Atticus Finch to kill a mockingbird. Get the damn rifle out of the house and shoot the dog down in the street. That's the fate of NATO. You don't have to put a bullet in it because NATO is going to pull a bullet in its own head by doing this stupid stuff. They can't afford it. They're going to go bankrupt. Russia must allow NATO to go bankrupt, must allow the G7 to collapse. But the only way to do that is to finish the mission. The mission isn't just killing Ukrainian soldiers. The mission is eradicating an ideology that is part of the Ukrainian DNA. I'm sorry. That's the level we're at right now. Too many people have died. If you weren't willing to do this when you started, you shouldn't have started. That's just what I'm saying. And I would be furious. I'm furious as an American. I'm furious as a world citizen, because Russia initiated a special military operation ostensibly to avenge the deaths of 14,000 people in Donbass and to liberate, a couple million Russians. Okay, I support that, but it's become something much bigger, and we all knew it would become something much bigger. Russia had to have known that this would become much bigger. Russia has now put the world at risk. I don't blame Russia. Maybe it needed to be done. Sometimes a boil must be lanced. But don't start something that's going to create all of this problem and then don't finish it. Finish the job. And the job is, as Russia said at the beginning, demilitarization, denazification, permanent neutrality. This may require the death of Ukraine, that Ukraine as a viable nation state can no longer exist. And believe me, if this neo-Nazi ideology has permeated the population to the level it appears to, then the Ukrainian nation no longer deserves to exist. And that would be the perfect message for Russia to send to the rest of Europe. That if you want to play big games, there's big consequences. NATO, you went into Ukraine, you got them, you motivated them. And we now know none of this was an accident. We now know this was done on purpose. Poroshenko says that Minsk was never going to be signed. It was there only to buy time for NATO to train a Ukrainian army to retake the Donbass and Crimea. That means NATO was a complicit party from the very beginning. Stoltenberg is a lying piece of dirt. Every American diplomat is a liar. Every European diplomat is a liar. They are all liars. They cannot be trusted. Why would you have a ceasefire with people you can't trust when you're winning? A ceasefire happens when you got issues, when you're not doing well, when you need to have a pause. Russia doesn't need to pause. Russia needs to put down on the accelerator and run through these people because they started it. I have no sympathy for NATO. NATO started a war in 2014 that has resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of Russians. And if I were a Russian politician, a Russian citizen, a Russian patriot, I would be enraged to the point that I'm willing to undertake whatever sacrifice necessary to finish this job because Russia's not strong enough. I'll say this right up the bat. If Russia pauses, it's not strong enough to win. Russia's victory comes by maintaining the pressure, by keeping by maintaining the momentum. Momentum is what will win this war for Russia. The momentum militarily, the momentum politically, and more importantly, the momentum economically, because this is an economic war more than anything. The ultimate demise of NATO, Europe, G7, the United States will come economically. But the moment Russia stops, because Russia's winning on all fronts right now. There's not a single front that Russia's not winning on. Russia, and the thing is, by keeping the momentum, the other side can't adjust, can't adapt. The OODA loop, I've talked about the OODA loop. Get inside the enemy's decision-making cycle. Well, Russia is so far inside NATO's decision-making cycle, NATO just doesn't even know what it's doing anymore. They're fantasizing about 300,000 rapid reaction forces they can't afford. Okay, that's where NATO's at. They're way out of the loop. The G7 is lost. They don't know what to do about this new reserve currency. The moment Russia pauses, they catch up. And then they start to take the initiative. And then Russia's inside their decision-making cycle, and Russia loses. They can't win a ceasefire. They can't win a pause because they're not big enough. They've got some advantages right now, but they haven't sealed the deal with China totally. They don't have the big pipeline going in to guarantee the supply of energy. And while they're able to sell some oil to India, they haven't cemented that relationship with a BRICS-like reserve currency that locks India into the Russian economy. There's a lot that needs to be done economically before Russia is truly secure. And the way you continue to do that is to demonstrate the weakness of Europe, the weakness of the United States, the weakness of NATO, by continuing the operation the way you're going now. Understand that the West has never prepared for an actual war with either Russia or China. There's been rhetoric, there's been think tankism, but the military is never prepared for an actual war. We're not prepared. And that's why I push back a little bit on Biden doing something stupid. There's nothing he can do. I mean, the military is going to say, what do you want us to do, boss? I want you to put 1 million men in Europe. We don't have them. You know, the United States Army just eliminated the requirement for high school education because they can't recruit enough. So now we're taking high school dropouts. Yay! But the point is, we have always postured ourselves to say Russia will never invade Ukraine because economically they would be destroyed. That when we impose these sanctions, Russia's economy would collapse. We believe that in the West. And we've also said that China would never put at risk its economic development by having a real war with the West because ultimately our economy is stronger than the Chinese economy and they would lose every incentive. Now, think about the Chinese right now. The Russians invaded Ukraine. The West put in their sanctions. It backfired. The West is collapsing right now. Collapsing. Russia's hurting, but it's doing all right. So now what is the strength of the Western economy in any potential conflict with China? Because that was always the great selling point. China will not pull the trigger on Taiwan because China will lose economically. I think that narrative has been flipped right now, that China can invade Taiwan and the West can't do anything about it economically because the West has no economy left. Do you understand that the Japanese, I mean, Russia, doesn't play games. They just pass laws that are going to nationalize Sakhalin-2. Sakhalin 2 provided Japan with all of its gas. They're going to lose Sakhalin 2, which means they're going to lose their gas, which means their economy collapses. Every Western economy is on the verge of collapse. And the only thing that's held Russia back from hitting all the off switches is the notion that we're going to be a responsible player in the world. But if China decides to engage Taiwan and the West decides to engage China economically, it will be the shortest victory in history. Not only will China win militarily against the Taiwanese instantaneously, but any effort by the West to punish China will backfire. China will take over every market that exists in the world because the West can't sustain its pathetic little economic effort. That's the reality right now. The West has no economy, no economic depth. They're very vulnerable. And then you attach the economy to politics, domestic politics. You know who's not going to suffer a parliamentarian vote of no confidence? Xi Jinping. Ain't never going to happen. You know who is going to suffer a parliamentary vote of no confidence? Every single prime minister in the West this winter. Because their people are going to lose confidence in them because they're freezing to death. They have no jobs. Their industries have collapsed. In America, we don't have a parliament, but we do have midterm elections. The Democrats are going to get wiped off the face of the earth. Joe Biden is going to be I didn't think a president could be as unpopular as Donald Trump. Well, let me introduce you to Joe Biden. He's about to become the most unpopular president in American history. So the Chinese got nothing to lose. I think, and I think we discussed in the past, the Chinese have upped their rhetoric to levels that have never been heard of before. Basically, when you have the Chinese Minister of Defense call his American counterpart and tell him to shut up, sit down, don't say a damn word, because if you continue this, we're going to blow you to smithereens. They told that to the Taiwanese too. And from what I hear, they're making the moves necessary to do this at any moment. There were some rumors a while back that Putin got recalled to the Kremlin because he was receiving a phone call from the Chinese who were saying, we need to pull the trigger on Taiwan because the West is doing really stupid things. I still believe that China is going to invade Taiwan. They have no choice. Want to know why? The West is so weak right now. They will never have a better opportunity than right now to do this. And if they actually do it as quick as I think they can, it might minimize the damage done to Taiwan because the Taiwanese are looking at Ukraine saying, we don't want that to be our future. So when the Chinese troops come across the border, there'll be some token resistance, but I'm pretty sure the most of them are just going to put up their hands and say, screw it, we quit. Come on in. The West abandoned us again because there's nothing. There's no Western support. This isn't South Korea. There's not 400,000 American troops earmarked to flow in. There's Tammy Duckworth. I don't think Taiwan wants to go to war based upon the visit of Tammy Duckworth, with her incomplete legislation. So I think in NATO, I don't think China's losing any sleep over the idea of the Prince of Wales and the Repulse. Wait a minute, I meant the British fleet sailing into the Pacific. I mentioned the Prince of Wales and Repulse because if you know your history, back in 1941, the British sent them off the coast of Singapore and the Japanese sank them. That's the fate of any fleet that sails in defense of Taiwan. They will be sunk. So I just, I'm so frustrated because none of this needed to happen, to be honest. None of this needed to happen. I don't know if there was more Russia could have done diplomatically. I personally think there was, but then again, we don't know if what the Russian government says about the imminence of a Ukrainian offensive in early March, is that true or is that just propaganda? If it's true, then Putin had no choice. But if it's propaganda, then shame on Putin. I'm sorry, because while the Russians are winning, and it's a great victory for Russia, the world has never been more dangerous today. This is more dangerous than July 1914. This is far more dangerous than July 1914. I'm a little glib sometimes about, kill them all, hang them all. That's just anger and the dog talking. But the fact is, we don't need to be here where we're at. This is a very, very, very dangerous situation. Diplomacy doesn't exist anymore. Nobody's doing the old-fashioned diplomacy. And the West, there's a saying in the United States is there's nothing more dangerous than a scared cop with a gun. And it's true. You have a domestic situation and a cop shows up, pulls his pistol, and he's scared, he's going to pull the trigger. The West right now is a scared cop with a gun. We're scared because we just don't have what it takes. We're over our head militarily. We don't have the confidence that we used to have. And yet we have leaders that continue to say, hey, go in there and resolve this situation. Because that's what NATO's doing. Instead of somebody saying, whoa, let's put the brakes on this thing. Let's de-escalate. We don't have to escalate to de-escalate. Let's just de-escalate. That would be my thing. It's the strongest thing you can do is to de-escalate, because you don't expose your vulnerabilities and you don't create the condition for yourself to get beat on the battlefield. The West should be de-escalating right now, not sending weapons in. You know what happens when you stop sending weapons into Ukraine? You create the potential for what Ray has been talking about. If we stop shipments right now, we have the potential for a ceasefire. We have the potential for Ukraine to continue to survive as a nation state. That's the kind of de-escalation that can take place. And again, if I were advising the president, I would say that's a defeat for Russia. If you want to beat Russia, make them stop this war prematurely. That's how you win. That's what victory looks like, making Russia stop the war prematurely. While there may be a military victory, it's a political defeat. Because if Russia doesn't achieve total demilitarization, total denazification, and permanent neutrality, it's a loss. If it doesn't achieve all three, failure on any one of those points, Russia lost this war. And if I were the West, I would say we must make the conditions for Russia to lose this war. And the best way to do that is stop sending weapons to Ukraine. Create the political imperative for a ceasefire. The second Russia signs onto a ceasefire, war's over, man. Russia lost. And that's what I'd be shooting for right now. But they're not, the West isn't doing that. They're upping the ante, and that means they're playing to Russia's advantage. Russia has engaged a military machine right now that's in the business of eating NATO equipment. You do not feed a Rottweiler raw meat. NATO is feeding the Russian Rottweiler raw meat. Russia loves to eat NATO equipment. They will continue to eat it as long as NATO feeds them. The best thing to do is stop feeding the damn dog. The Russians know where Ray's right. The Russians know where the decision-making cycle. Sorry, they're not going to hit Washington, D.C. They are going to hit London. I think they made that clear that the first decision-making cycle decision they'll hit outside of Ukraine will be London. Then they'll hit Brussels. They'll hit Ramstein. There's a bunch of places they'll hit. They all know this. And I'm fairly certain that the Russians have some back channels with the Americans where they've made this clear, what the consequences of your red lines will be. But the Russians have shown extreme patience. That's the other thing that I don't think everybody is quite understand is the level of maturity and patience that has been exhibited by Russia. If the United States had been put in a situation half as dire as what Russia's been subjected to, we'd have bombed the world. But Russia's been very patient. And I hope Russia continues to be patient because they're winning. They don't need to escalate, no matter how justified they are. They don't need to escalate this outside of Ukraine's borders because Russia has the winning formula in play right now. And as I said, the game that's being played is feed the Russian bear NATO red meat. It's a great game. Russia can play this all summer, all winter, and NATO will run out of red meat. The Russian bear will just be more hungry. And I think that's where we're at right now.